this is not going to help you get a good score in part 2. Hello there, chaps. Welcome to Click English. My name is Harshvardhan Vashisht, and today we are going to discuss some common mistakes which people make in IELTS speaking. And we are going to cover mistakes in part 1, 2, and 3. So let us start by discussing some common mistakes which people make in IELTS speaking part 1. Now, the first mistake is so common that all the IELTS trainer discuss this mistake at least once. Now we know that the questions asked in IELTS part 1 are close-ended questions. And because of this nature of the questions, people in their nervousness often make this mistake. And that is giving one-word answers. Now this mistake is extremely common and something which you should stay away from. Now it's alright to give one-word answer for maybe one question, but my advice is always try to create full sentences. It should be kept in mind that developing answers is the best way to get a good score. So stay away from very short answers or one-word answer. Try to develop your answer, but in your development, do not create this mistake, which is mistake number 2. That is going off topic. Now, sometimes people get nervous, sometimes people get really fearful of giving very short answers. So, in part 1, they try a bit too hard to develop their answers. And it is precisely because of this, they start talking off topic. So, for example, if the examiner asks you, what is your favorite sport? And you start talking about different types of sports or famous sports personalities, then you are completely off topic. And you will be surprised to know that a lot of students do try it, especially those who are not very confident about their speaking skills. So, if you are one of those who feel that your speaking skills might get you into trouble, then make sure that in your attempt to avoid giving short answers, you do not start giving answers which are completely off topic. Remember, in the attempt to elaborate, develop your answers so you do not go off topic. The third common mistake in IELTS speaking part 1 is giving memorized answers. Now in IELTS speaking part 1, questions are of very general nature. They will ask you questions about your life, your hobbies, your likes, your dislikes, the kind of food you eat, the festivals you celebrate, your culture, family, all sorts of things. And a lot of people know this, but again, for some reason, they try to memorize these answers. Now, the examiners are quite experienced. They can see which answer is memorized and which answer isn't. Therefore, my advice is to not memorize answer, get to know about the topic, learn about yourself, learn about your likes and dislikes, and get comfortable in speaking. Because memorized answer, your rate of speech will be different. Your intonation will be completely different. And this difference can be easily spotted by the examiner. And that is not going to help you. Let's move on to common mistakes in IELTS speaking part 2. Now, one of the most common mistake in IELTS speaking part 2 is not able to speak at length, not able to speak for the allotted time. You stop after giving an answer for 40 seconds or maybe even 1 minute, and you're not able to speak for complete 2 minutes. That is a mistake which, unfortunately, which regrettably, is quite common, and a lot of people struggle from this. Now, what happens when you're not able to speak for complete 2 minutes? You basically tell the examiner that you do not have the ability to develop your answer, to stretch your answer, and to talk about a topic at length, even after preparing for 1 minute. Now, when this happens, even if you answer all the other questions really well, but if this happens, then there is a rare chance that you will get a band score of more than 7. So, make sure when you are practicing, you are able to speak naturally and you are able to develop your answer for complete 2 minutes. Now, as in part 1, memorizing answer is also common in part 2. In fact, it is more common in part 2 than part 1. And as I mentioned before, if you memorize your answer, then your rate of speech can become completely different. It can become quicker or it can become slower. In fact, your intonation also changes. And it happens a lot of time that you might start sounding like a machine, like a robot. And again, the examiners are experienced. They can see through this and can spot which answer is memorized and which isn't. So I do not suggest that you memorize your answer, but you familiarize yourself with the topic. If you are familiar with the topic, then you will be able to speak at length. You will be able to speak naturally. The pauses which you will take will sound natural. And if you slip somewhere with vocabulary or grammar, that will also be natural. It will not stand out as a memorized answer. So make sure you familiarize with the topics, but you do not memorize them if you have the time. Unfortunately, there are a lot of books in the market, a lot of teachers who tell students that you must memorize this answer from this book. That is something which I do not recommend at all. These examiners, they are very experienced, and if you've memorized answer from a certain book, they will catch it because they have heard these answers many times before. Therefore, it's always better to develop your own answer. You familiarize yourself with the topic, you develop your answer, and then in your test, when you're answering, you do not sound like a machine. You're not giving an answer which other people in past have also given, and there's a better chance of you getting a good score. The third mistake can occur because you're not able to speak at length, or maybe because you have memorized your answer but you haven't memorized it by heart. And this mistake is repetition, repeating your words and sentences. So if a person is not able to speak for complete 2 minutes, they get this feeling that they might not be doing so well, then they're not able to develop their answers. And because of this, they start repeating what they say. They sometimes completely repeat the exact sentences, the exact lines, or they paraphrase what they have already mentioned before. And this inability to develop your answer and repeating yourself tells the examiner that you do not deserve a good score. So, one more common mistake in part 2 is incorrect usage of vocabulary or idioms. Many times people think that they must rarely use words, difficult vocabulary, and also idioms. So they forcefully try to insert this in their answer. Now, what happens is, in their forceful attempt, they do not realize that you cannot always use a word wherever you want to. It makes the answer unnatural and it feels forced. While the examiner does appreciate these attempts, however, If you're using vocabulary or idioms at incorrect places where they do not belong, they do not fit, then I'm sorry to say this will not really help you and it will just reduce your score. Now let's move on to mistakes in part 3. The first mistake, and again a very common one in part 3, is not able to answer all the questions. Now part 3 is more open-ended in nature. It's more like sort of a discussion going on between the examiner and the candidate. And the questions are more general in nature, and the examiner does try to test the complete speaking abilities of the candidate here in part 3. So they will ask different sorts of questions and will try to assess the level of the candidate. Now, a lot of times it happens that by this time, after part 2, many people lose focus, they lose concentration, they do not listen to the question properly, or they do not understand the question properly, and they simply are unable to answer questions. If this happens, if you're not able to answer the questions, then again, this is not going to help you get a good score in part 2. This is not going to help you get a good score in part 3. I'm sorry about the cats. I hope it's not too distracting. Anyways, moving on. So this mistake, you can make it into 2 mistakes or combine it into 1 mistake. That is misunderstanding the question and answering something completely different, or not answering the question. Now, whatever the case is, if this happens, then again, it's not really going to help your score and you might fall down to 6.5 bands or below. The last mistake which I'm going to cover here is not able to use a wide range of grammar structures. Now, it's not necessary that you have to make complex sentences all the time. You have to speak naturally. So it must feel natural. You have to understand that if you're having a conversation or if you're having a discussion about a topic and you're giving your view, there are times when you will make real long sentences. They can be complex sentences, but there are also times when you're also making simple sentences, short sentences. So your answer should be a blend of this. If you're unable to use wide variety of grammar structures, or if there are some grammar structures which you repeatedly use and you're not able to explore other parts of grammar, then again it is possible the examiner might spot this and they will not give you a very high score in grammatical range. So make sure when you practice, you are comfortable in using different grammatical structures. But also understand that you do not have to all the time use different grammar structures. Do not make the mistake of overdoing things. Keep it balanced and keep it to your comfort level. So if you're comfortable in using different grammar structures, great. If you're not comfortable in using a wide variety of grammar structures, then practice before taking the IELTS test. That's my advice, that's my suggestion. Okay, so that's it. Those are the common mistakes which people make in IELTS speaking. Make sure you practice hard enough and do not make these mistakes. I'll see you again next time with more tips. Till then, keep practicing.